in the blink of an eye, $6,200 worth of monthly income is gone.
Wow.
And you're thinking, okay, don't panic. Right. So that was where the whole thing started. Now that wasn't where it ended, right? Like when it came around to that post that I put in pro. So that was where it started, was like with that. And now one thing I will say about me is I'm good under pressure. I'm like, hypothetical things cause me a great deal of worry and anxiety. Once something becomes real, typically I can move along and deal with it. Okay. So within a couple weeks, I was like, you know what? It's going to be fine. I've been working on like a lead flow process and everything. Like, I'm probably going to have to like let my team sort of fade into the background a little bit while I take a little bit more of the hands-on work for a little while. But thanks to what I teach, recurring revenue, subscription-based web design, we were good.
Welcome to the Web Design Business Podcast with your host, Josh Hall, helping you build a web design business that gives you freedom and a lifestyle you love.
Oh, my friends, the roller coaster that is business, particularly web design and entrepreneurship. My guest in this episode recently lost over $6,000 per month in recurring revenue, but he's rebounded. In this episode, we're going to dive into everything that he learned and what he did immediately when this happened, because this was all within the span of a week. And most importantly, the things he's done to give himself a buffer of MRR, monthly recurring revenue. My guest in this one probably needs no introduction if you've been following the show for a while, Steve Schramm. He is kind of the king of subscription web design. He's been on the show numerous times. He's a founder of my community, Web Designer Pro, and he has built up his web design business with the subscription web design model. And subscription web design, recurring revenue is amazing. But what a lot of people don't talk about is, while you build it up and get to a certain level, it's awesome, but that does not mean that it's always going to be there. You have to continue to innovate. And in the case of what Steve went through recently, he just kind of had a bad week where two of his biggest accounts dropped. And that was over $6,000 a month of recurring revenue that was in 1 week kind of gone for him. But again, he's rebounded, and he had a lot of lessons to share in this one that I learned from him. So I know you're going to take this and be able to apply it to your business, whether you're doing the subscription web design model or whether you are doing support, maintenance, or growth plans in your business. The key is you want to reduce churn, and I hope everything that Steve and I get into here helps you as well. You can connect with Steve at steveschramm.co. That is his website, which will link you out to his courses, his podcasts. He used to have the subscription web design podcast that is now rebranded to Web Design MBA. So give that a go if you want to listen and learn for more on Steve. But for right now, let's hear about how the heck he rebounded from $6,000 down in 1 week. Oof, shivers in my spine just hearing about that. Here we go. Well, Steve, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show again, man, and to take some time to chat about the roller coaster of business.
Oh my goodness. And boy, is it a roller coaster. It is just one day to the next. You just never know what's going to happen. But I'm blessed again to be here with you, Josh, one of my favorite people in the world. So I always say yes to this opportunity.
Well, man, you posted a post at the end of 2024 in Web Designer Pro. You're a founding member of Pro. You're one of the many people in there that just make it what it is. And this type of posts that you laid out there is one of the reasons, I think it's one of the things that makes Pro so different compared to most online communities, is like sheer transparency and utter, I guess that's it, authenticity, transparency, because I think a lot of people, especially as coaches, you want to focus on the bright side of business, but people need to know that this is hard and that there are good months and bad months. And I just wanted to just briefly go over what you said here real quick for everyone watching and listening who isn't in Pro, who maybe or hasn't seen this. But you had just mentioned your title was therapy, transparency, and hopefully encouragement, which I absolutely love. So right there, I'm hooked. Copywriting Steve at it again. And you said, in short, I'm not going to read obviously the whole thing, but you said there have been some serious highs, some serious lows, a lot of uncertainty, gratefulness, frustration, joy, pretty much every emotion. excitement, trembling, fear. You said, I'm writing this post for a few reasons: to process, to vent, to encourage, to seek encouragement, to stay real, and to get over my own pride, and probably a few more things as well. And in short, I just wanted to lay that out there because that was the foundation for the roller coaster that you had at the end of 2024. So yeah, give us what's the summary version of what you went through that prompted that post? Obviously I just read the intro, but
no, that's okay. And that I'll just give a plug, an unsolicited plug here, because Josh's group, Web Designer Pro, just really is fantastic for this kind of thing. I mean, it's the one place on the internet where I feel pretty comfortable bearing all. I mean, I'm pretty transparent on my own podcast and stuff, but I'm not going to get into all the nitty gritty like I would in Josh's club. So I still keep calling it the club. It's not the club anymore. It's Web Designer Pro. It's that's fancy, right. But it's habit.
That's all right.
So yeah, I'll give you the basic rundown. So the whole thing sort of started about a month or so earlier than that post. I woke up, I think it was on a Tuesday, and I got 2 emails that morning, neither of which I was like, both of which I was kind of thinking were coming at some point, neither of which I was expecting to happen quite when they did. And certainly not both happening on the same day. But the long and short of that is that my two biggest clients essentially both they didn't cancel their service. They both downgraded to needing maintenance only, because in one case we had a bigger retainer that was focused on development work, and then in another case we had a marketing program with them. There was not any hard feelings. There was not any, huge problems. Again, the one company, there was a planned eventuality where the WordPress site was going down, and a standalone app that was being developed was going to be there instead. And so that was a natural course of business. And then the other one was a company that was bought out by another company, and the buyout was like a multi-year process. And throughout the majority of the process, we had been doing marketing for the company that had been bought out. And essentially that was coming to a close, and they didn't need our marketing services anymore because the parent company was going to be taking it over. So again, a couple just very reasonable circumstances with no hard feelings or anything like that. Nevertheless, it's a Tuesday where you wake up and pretty much in the blink of an eye, $6,200 worth of monthly income is gone.
Wow.
And you're thinking, okay, don't panic, right? So that was where the whole thing started. Now that wasn't where it ended, right? Like when it came around to that post that I put in Pro. So that was where it started, was like with that. And now one thing I will say about me is I'm good under pressure. I'm like, hypothetical things cause me a great deal of worry and anxiety. Once something becomes real, typically I can move along and deal with it okay. So within a couple weeks, I was like, you know what? It's going to be fine. I've been working on like a lead flow process and everything. Like, but I'm probably going to have to like let my team sort of fade into the background a little bit while I take a little bit more of the hands-on work for a little while. But thanks to what I teach, recurring revenue, subscription-based web design, we were good. I mean, we weren't going under. Like, the money was there to pay all the bills and everything. I just, we had a few projects in process, and so figuring out who was going to do all the work related to that was something to think through, and I worked through it. And then, I don't remember the exact, I should have looked this up, but I don't remember like the exact events and timing and everything, but I think it was like the day or two before I posted in Pro, a client that we had a current project for, which is also not just my standard $297 a month, recommended subscription web design. This was a bigger project. It's for a town. And, anyway, that project which was about 2 months in, I made a discovery / early administrative error on, and we were nowhere near as far along in the project as we should have been for the time frame. And so I delivered an update to the client, and the client was basically like, "What the heck is this? This is not what we expected, and we expected much more than this, and blah blah blah. We need to have a meeting." And so the pit of my stomach anxiety at this point is just becoming a little bit overwhelming. And then in that same time period, like either the day after that or whatever, like right around when I posted in there, I had 6 deals that were in the pipeline, which is part of why I was like, okay, I think I can get over the income loss thing. I had 6 deals in the pipeline. 5 of them closed on one day. And in that same day, I received the biggest single check. I'm not going to disclose the number here, but I received the biggest single check for an annual project for a new client, or a new project for a current client that I'd ever received in my life. So here I am. I've received, I'll just say this, it was tens of thousands of dollars. I will say that. Okay. So I received a check for tens of thousands of dollars, and yet felt like the biggest failure.
And that
ever.
was because that was the exact same time that the one client had an issue, and
the one client had an issue, but 2 clients had left, and it's just all the roller coasters. And it finally just was like, I'm never getting past this if I don't write about it. Right. And so the gist of what I wrote in there was, look, the issues aren't solved yet. We haven't made up for the same, for the recurring revenue, but like, I just need to process and just talk about how I'm feeling right now. Maybe somebody else can relate, or maybe sometime down the road when you need it, it'll be here for you. And yeah, so that's basically the story of that led up to that post that you referred to in December.
What was the time period between losing those 2 big recurring revenue clients and then getting the huge wave of influx of cash? Was it a couple weeks span, or what was the time period between all that?
It was about a month. It was about a month. Yeah, it was about a month. It was just enough to be like, whoa. What are we going to do? Actually, let me reframe this a little bit. Let me back up a little bit, because I just remembered something. I think what happened is I got notice about this in early October, right? Okay. So October, November, December, I got notice about it in early October. That made the last month for the $2,000 ish a month client. Okay. And then the rest of it was made up by this other client. And that notice, I said, hey, well, by the way, you have like a 30-day expiring, there's like a 30-day written notice that you have to give us. So I was able to get one more payment from them for November, one more month of service for November. And so that kind of gave me November to think about, like, okay, I gotta figure some things out. I gotta figure out how this money is going to be replaced. And then by December, of course, I knew that none of that income was there anymore. And so it was getting really real. And so then early December is when we did have that huge influx of income come in, and we added some new recurring clients too. So it was like the last 3 months of the year were just like, if I can say this, scary AF. I mean, they just were scary.
Yeah, I would say something more drastic than that for sure. Look, you're in this post, all of the emotions you mentioned: uncertainty, gratefulness, frustration, joy, excitement, trembling fear, highs and lows. I mean, your month is very common in the entrepreneurial world, or just as a business owner. So I love that we're talking about this, because even with a subscription style model or recurring revenue model, if there are waves or big clients that drop off, it still happens. You still can have feast and famine with a recurring revenue model, especially in your case when you have, a lot of eggs in a couple baskets. So I do love that we're talking about this, Steve. I want to drill into the specifics on this, just to hear about what you did and how you made it through, especially that first part. I have to say though, real quick, it's not uncommon. I've found, I just know this from my experience and talking with members in Pro, with having a single day of emotions like that. I remember when we landed the biggest project we did to date at that time, which was $15,000, that I got the note, I got a call from the client, and he said we were moving forward. The same day he called me like at night. And prior that day, my wife and I, she had watched a family friend, a little girl, for like a year. And she became kind of like a part of our family. And it was our last day watching her. So it was kind of an emotional day. She wasn't going to be around. This was before we had kids. And so like we took her to the park. We kind of shed some tears because it was like, oh, we're never going to ever do this again with her, probably. That happened. And then we got the call because Em was pregnant at the time with our first Bria. We got the call that after some genetic testing that Bria did have a chromosome deletion. So life-changing news immediately after watching the girl after the gal was picked up. Probably not 2 hours later, the client calls and says, hey, Josh, really exciting news. We're going to move forward. Normally I'd be like, that's awesome. All right, rock and roll. But I just remember I don't even remember what I said. We were just kind of in shock about the stuff with Bria that it was that wide range of emotions in the same day. I mean, I tried to keep my shit together basically, but I basically told him like, all right, really excited, man. But I didn't really feel it at all just because there were such more bigger things pressing. Although it was really nice when we got that news to know like, all right, we got a huge wave coming in. All that to say, man, it's not uncommon. It seems like for like everything to happen on one day.
Yeah. And I agree. And that there's been, I've had in the course of my business, just a handful. I mean, maybe if I'm being generous, 3 to 5, that I can think of off the top of my head, maybe 2 to 3 days like that, where it was like, where I got a life-changing email, right? That just totally ruined my day or something. And it sounds weird to have like one of the worst days in existence be a day where you got paid a lot of money. And I think there's a really interesting lesson there of just how little of life is actually about how much money you make beyond, the basics and everything else. It's nice to make money. 100% certainly helps. And I am mucho grateful for that project that came in, and it didn't save my business, but it sure did help my anxiety. It was like, okay, good. We have months to work with now of like figuring things out. We can calm down. I will say one thing that made this a little bit worse for me. And this does not mean I'm better than another person or anything who is dealing with this. It doesn't mean that at all. But one thing that's different is that I also have a role sort of coaching and educating other web designers. And I'm very vocal about the model that works for my business. And in fact, after those clients left, the first thing I did was record a podcast episode about it. Right. And that's a whole other story. I actually took a hiatus from the podcast for a few months, and that was the last episode that was left hanging out there. The truth is that I just got so busy after that season that I just couldn't justify getting back to it. I had to put my head down and get to work. But it probably looked to most people like, I lost these clients, my business failed, and I pieced out. So part of the emotion of that was twofold. That's why I mentioned the part about pride. Part of it was, well, not only do I like coach other web designers, I have a podcast. I'm supposed to have my crap together, right? So that I can help other people. But, even within your group, within Pro, I have somewhat of an influence there. And, it was really hard to come to terms with the fact that like, hey, I don't always have everything under control, as much as we'd like to think that we do have control. So again, that just is a little bit different thing where it's like, I was kind of, this is a little bit dramatic, but I was kind of suffering in public in a way, right? Where I was like, I'm really nervous about what this means for who I am and my validation as a business owner. Does it make me any worse as a coach or whatever? And of course, looking back now, objectively, I can reason through those things. And I know where I stand and know my value doesn't lie in how much money I make or whether or not I lose a client. It's in the experience that I've gained and how I could communicate that to others. But in those moments though, when it's all weighing down on you, man, it's hard. It really presses in and it just makes you want to shut down.
And I think the reality is because you are in a coaching role and kind of an authority role in web design, both in Pro and with your podcast and your subscription model stuff, it's like people appreciate authenticity and transparency, but people also want to learn from and follow people who are successful. And so it's like failure doesn't necessarily attract paying customers. So I think that's where like going into the outset, like we talked about, I think that's why I really am so glad you shared about that, the roller coaster. But at the same time, I think that's why so many quote unquote influencers and authority folks are afraid to share when things aren't going great, because suddenly it can look like, oh, well, like you just said, is that somebody I want to follow? But most importantly, things did turn around. And I talked about this. I think you saw recently, like I shared my story with two down revenue years. I shared a little bit about that publicly, but I didn't let on to it with exactly where things were. I waited till I was kind of past the storm and figured out the most important lessons learned through that before I shared that full podcast episode, which is 360. If anyone wants to go back and listen to that, because I really drill into everything I learned from being over $100,000 down in a couple of years. But my best year ever was last year in 24. So it was a lot easier for me to be like, okay, we're back. I'm fired up, confident as ever. Here's what I learned. So to you, I do appreciate you, Steve, being open to share, what you were going through. But I wanted to specifically talk to you here today to find out what you did to even, I don't know where things are at today. I don't know if you're completely rebounded, but most importantly, I think a lot of people give up when things get hard. And the reality is there's a reason I don't put easy in any of my marketing or courses or podcasts. It's not easy. Web design, entrepreneurship, business, being a business owner, it's not easy. If you want easy, go get a job. That could be a lot easier. So I'm kind of curious, immediately when you lost those big recurring revenue, those big MRR checks coming in, you mentioned you're good under pressure, which is step number one, get good under pressure. What did you scale your team back? You mentioned you were talking about, what could they do? What was what did you do practically in those first couple of weeks when you lost a ton of revenue and cash flow?
Yeah. Oh, this is a great question. And I certainly hope that I can do it justice with an answer, because frankly, it comes down to just remembering, well, what did I do? I also,
it's probably a blur. It's probably a whirlwind, right?
It is, man. It's been a total whirlwind. So, right. The first thing that you have to do when a moment of crisis comes is, frankly, you just have to get out of your head a little bit, and you have to make a distinction between what is okay and what isn't okay. All right. So, it's kind of like if you leave the house for a vacation and, you start to get this nagging feeling that you left the stove on, from breakfast or whatever, like before you left, and, you're about to be an hour away from town. And so it's kind of like, what do you do when that situation strikes? Well, if you're reasonably certain that the oven was left on, or the stove, whatever I just said, was left on, your house could burn down. And so, probably wise to check and make sure, either have somebody go check, or if you're still close enough, turn around and go check, to make sure things are okay. Maybe a weird analogy, but the point I'm getting at is that if you don't already have a great handle on where the numbers are in your business, that's sort of where you have to look. And again, we're assuming a situation similar to mine where, I'm not qualified to help you if your crisis is of a different nature, right? Of a family crisis that happens or whatever. I mean, we all deal with those things differently, and I'm not qualified to. But if the crisis is you lose a really big client, then I have something to offer here. And the first step would just be to make sure that you are very clear on your numbers. What's the number coming in? What's the number that has to go out? What's the amount of, what are the current projects that you have? What do those things do? Who do you have working for you? What roles are they in? Are you by yourself? Right. So there's all these factors. Now for me, my business had gotten to the point where my staff was doing, 90+% of the deliverable work. And there are business consultants who would come into my business and look at my numbers and argue that even at my highest, which was a lot better than a lot of web designers, right? There's a lot of struggling web designers, unfortunately. I've been blessed to do very well. Okay. And so there are business consultants who would come in and say that even at my highest, point of revenue and income, that I should have been doing all the work myself, right? That I shouldn't have hired a team. Oh, this goes back to the first podcast episode that you had me on back in like April of 2021, where I made the point that I started scaling early. And I stand by that. I think if freedom is the game you're playing, I totally stand by.
I was just thinking, well, who the hell consultant would tell you that you shouldn't hire work out and be the owner? I would fire them if somebody tells you that.
Yeah, there's things that I've read and seen for people that it's like, if you're not doing a minimum of $250K a year, then you shouldn't hire any workout.
Oh, that's like, pish posh. Losers. Losers.
I agree. I think it's stupid. That's why I don't do it. Right.
Here.
So just to make the point of like, I had gotten to the point where my business was, most of the actual work was being done by other people. And I was just very high level, sort of an editing role and like looking over things and making sure the work was being done. Right. And so, it's kind of one of those things where, okay, when you're looking at finances, you can go look at like all your subscriptions and you could try to trim your design subscriptions and your project management subscriptions and all that down by $5, $10, $20 here. But if you're paying a team of any kind, then that's where the expense is in your team, right? The other things are, not nearly as significant. They won't move the needle nearly as fast. So
that's a great point.
I wrote an email to my team, and I've always been very transparent with them when stuff like this happens. And I've had it revenue dips once or twice before. This is nothing new. This one was the scariest one for sure. And so I wrote to them just, hey guys, look, here's the situation. Just so you know, I am going to be scaling back a few things. I'm going to be taking over a few things. And we looked at the latest heartbeat. My project manager writes what's called a heartbeat every Monday, which is basically a look at the current projects that we're working on, what's left to do on those projects, etc. Mm-hmm. And so I went through the latest heartbeat and was like, I'm taking over this, and this. The funding source for this is a little bit different. Like I have a project that I'm working on that I'm working with a group and they're kind of funding the team as we go. I'm doing my part for free. It's because I'm involved with the project. And so like that project can continue and I don't have to be the one to work on that. There's money for the team to work on that. So there was a few things that fell into that category where it made sense for the team to keep working on it. And then a few things that were currently going on where it made sense for me to be the one to be hands-on and to work on those. And so as it relates to that one thing, I have been gradually bringing the team back in on certain aspects of projects from that time until now. And so I'm feeling good about where they're at. I'm still doing a lot of work, but they are also continually doing more and more. And so we're ramping that back up slowly. But the first thing was just to take a hard look at the real numbers and say, what do we have to do? And the reality of what I had to do was I needed to basically go back to a clean slate and say, I am the chief, designer, developer or whatever, again, for a hot minute while I figure out what the numbers look like. So that was like the first and biggest thing that I did.
Gotcha. Now I feel like there's probably a couple different approaches somebody could take when the numbers dip like that, when you do have a team. Steve, I'm so glad you mentioned what expenses do you trim? Because you're absolutely right. Team cost is always generally way more than subscriptions. Like you could cancel a $9 monthly subscription, but that's not going to make the biggest difference, especially if you're losing, several $1,000s of MRR. By the way, I'm so glad you stayed in pro, and I hope it wasn't, I hope that was like one of the last things that you would have cut on your list. So I feel honored that you weren't like, Josh, lost some MRR, got to step out of pro for a while. So I count that an honor that I was not, the first things to cut.
It didn't even cross my mind, if I'm being completely honest with you. So
that's like the biggest win ever. So I appreciate that, Steve. But the other area I feel like you could have gravitated to is I'm going to go hard on selling and actually take less of the work on and go into sales mode. What prevented you from doing that? And obviously, and maybe, okay, I have an idea as to why, but I want to hear your thoughts. Like, why didn't you just sell more at that point?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's kind of like saying, why don't you just be more skinny? You know what I mean? So, because there are processes involved with sales, and one problem that I had up to this point was being lackadaisical with my processes that lead to sales. Okay. Now I do some things, right? But the truth is that I have been so bogged down with just the overall team management and things like that. And I went through a period of a few months where, I'll just be honest, things were good. And it was like, yep, I should be worried more about sales right now. But I'm not, right? And so that'll bite you in the butt when it turns out that you have a client that leaves. And so what's interesting is about a month and a half before all this happened, I had made the decision that I was going to change that. And so I started spending $10 a day. I said, actually, it's either 10 or 15. I can't remember which. I said, I'm basically going to spend $10 to $15 a day on ads for the rest of my life. And I'm going to figure out that, right? Because Facebook ads can be very, very powerful. And they're a way that does not rely on creating content, right? To be able to do it. So anyway, I wanted to learn ads. And by the way, to this day, it's now whatever date it is, February, as we're recording this, it's February 6th. I still have those ads active and I'm monitoring that. Now, I'm not doing much to convert those people into sales. Full transparency, because I haven't gotten there yet. And I'll explain more why in a minute. What I was trying to do is get my lead generation game as a web designer figured out, right? What does it look like? And what does the testing look like? But I know it's a long-term game. Okay. And so the resolve part of it was, I'm going to spend $10 to $15 a day figuring out this problem. And I can save that much money in other areas. Eating out a little bit less, or, just a few less business lunches, or just whatever it is, right? I can figure that out. And so, that was part of where my confidence came from. Cause at that point I had already generated quite a few leads. I think at this point I've generated over 100 leads that are just qualified web design, and digital marketing sort of leads. Now, again, like I said, I'm not trying to paint myself as some huge marketing guru here. Like I have not done anything reasonable to convert those leads. My plan is to implement a steady newsletter, and I'm working through that. But
that's an interesting. It's
it
good
wasn't
to know
soon
though.
enough yet.
It's good to know that you had already preemptively started changing the sales, marketing funnel a little bit before that even happened. Because otherwise, I feel like the strategy would have been a little different.
Correct. Yeah. And so I started out with that. Okay. And, I don't, I'm not a member of any local networking groups or anything. And so what I was doing during that first month of knowing that December was coming and I wasn't going to have that big check to rely on anymore. I was trying to do some strategic planning and figuring out of how I was going to start converting those leads. But we had active projects that we were working on that now I had to be more hands-on. And then when early December came and those 5 projects, came in, especially with the holidays and everything coming up, I left sales mode. I was like, I was in sales mode in the sense that I had just converted 6, leads into clients, right? So yeah. In one sense, there's something a little wrong with your question, right? Because in one sense, I was selling. I had 6 leads in the pipeline. I converted 5 of them, but now somebody had to do the work, and so I had to do the work. And so I have been. Here it is, early February. Other than holiday travel, I have been head down doing the work ever since then, and I'm just in the last couple of weeks starting to come up for air.
Well, and it makes sense too, because I think the reality is, look, you have a family, you have a team, there are actual expenses, actual numbers going out the door. So I asked that question a bit as a devil's advocate, just because I do feel like you took in, well, not actually, because you did sell during that. So my assumption, or the way I thought that went down, is that you didn't really have too much in the pipeline at that point. And you just took a conservative route by like, here's what I know is coming in with cash flow, so I'm going to make sure we don't go over budget or out of pocket over the next couple months, which is why you would do more work and spend your time in that. But you actually did, preemptively have a bit of a lead sales engine there. So when you found out that month between you finding out that they are going to be dropping, it actually is fair to say you did do those sales. What did you do to land those, half dozen clients? Did you do more calls?
Yeah.
Did you do more emailing? Did you do more DMing? What did you do to actually land those to get that big wave that kind of saved your butt in December?
Yeah, fair enough. And this is where my story is not very sexy. I didn't do anything, right? I mean, and I didn't do anything, and yet I did everything. What do I mean by that? Well, I didn't do anything particular. I didn't send DMs. I didn't even do a Facebook post. I don't think I might have, but I didn't do anything like that. A few of these were deals that had come in because they were referrals from past clients. One of them was a current client that was looking at adding a new website. Another one, they all mostly fell into that category. One or two may have come because they saw my link in the footer of another website or something like that. I do on my podcast, occasionally I do these, where did I get my last 5 clients episode? And I was thinking this morning that I actually want to do one. So I'm going to take a harder look at that, and I'll have an answer for people on the specific question that you asked me, when I do that. But the reality is that I said I didn't do anything, which I didn't, but I also did everything. And that to this point, I've been in business for 8 or 9 years, whatever it is now. And they always say that about 10 years is that inflection point where the word of mouth, if you could survive for 10 years, then the word of mouth can bring a stability to your business after that point that, it's a coveted thing. And we're kind of to that point now. That's why, it's like, well, are you selling now? Well, again, I haven't even started working on my conversion mechanism for the lead gen I've done, but I've got 7 leads in the pipeline right now.
From Facebook?
From a smattering, from referrals from other clients, work for past clients, things like that. I'm not talking about the Facebook leads at all yet. I haven't done anything with those. This is just a matter of consistent activity over the many years that I've been in business. So there's no guru-ness here other than to survive and do a great job for clients so that you get more referrals and more people interested in working with you. So, and I have new deals that are starting, and Lord willing, I mean, I don't plan to take any additional new clients even in February. I'm experimenting with a closed model. So probably start taking new clients again in March.
And the only reason I'm drilling in and hanging on to this month is because I'm more and more so fascinated what people do under pressure and what can be done. I mean, as a kind of part-time web design coach yourself, people come to you generally when there's challenges or there's a dry spell. So like the most common question just about I get now is, I'm in a dry spell, what do I do? So I'm even more really refining my acts on, I mean, I could give somebody 100 things to do, but it is very dependent on their situation, their time, their variables. You are in a different situation than a lot of people starting out because, like you just alluded to, you had pre-built like compounding interest of leads based off of your clientele,
Correct.
How long you've been doing this. So that helps clarify it for me, Steve. I think I was under the impression that the work you had started doing with Facebook gave you an option to like reach out to those leads, but no, in fact, it just kind of landed in your lap with just the nature of like all the work you had done prior. So now I am really curious about this though. What would have happened if that didn't happen? What would you have done? This is hypothetical, of course, but you did kind of you were in a place where we all know when you're in business for a while and you build a lot of referral partners and you get referrals, there are waves of business that come. You have a month where there's none, you have a month where there's ton. But what if that hadn't happened? What would you have done if that big wave didn't come for you in December?
Yep. That is a very good question. And I was about to answer it. So I'm glad that we're going here. Probably the lowest hanging fruit is that I would have started aggressively selling to those leads that I had started generating.
Gotcha.
So here's why. So when you look at like the spectrum of things that you can do, you can obviously go to networking groups or you can go to networking groups. You can start, you can start a podcast, right? You can go haunt Facebook groups and be helpful, right? You can generate leads on Facebook, right? There's a number of things that you can do, right? I probably would have spent more time doing things that had worked for me very well in the past. So networking groups have not worked for me very well in the past. Facebook groups have worked stellar for me in the past. So I immediately would have paid more attention to Facebook groups because I know that has been my bread and butter in the past on getting really good clients. And it's a little bit shorter of a distance usually to a client, even though there is some upfront value anticipated. It's a little bit shorter of a distance to clients than say starting a YouTube channel or a podcast or something like that, right? That's a good long-term strategy and you should do it. But if you need money now,
no, those aren't
don't start a podcast.
Those are not quick win strategies for sure. Yeah. Right. Those Facebook groups, by the way, Steve, are those like business groups? They're not talking about like Divi web designers or
no.
Would it be a mix of, yeah.
No, I mean, look, ultimately it's niche dependent. In my case, it's always been like, course creators and membership owners and stuff like that, like groups like that. That's where my client hangs out. Mm-hmm. And so by being helpful in those groups before, I've made tens of thousands of dollars from clients that I've gotten being helpful in those groups over the years. In fact, they were part of what launched my web design career. Mm-hmm. So I know how to generate value for people in those groups. And it's still a longer term play sometimes, but it's way shorter, than podcasts or anything like that. And, so that's one thing I would have done. The other thing that I would have done, in fact, I was pretty well gearing up to do it until it became pretty clear that I had a handful of deals that were getting ready to close and I needed to focus on getting the details closed with those so I could dive into the work. The thing that I would have done otherwise is to start calling on and having a more aggressive sales approach with those leads that I had generated via Facebook. Right? Because those were people, that's the beautiful thing about lead generation is these are people who are raising their hand and they're saying, I have a problem that you can solve. Now, of course, they're not saying, I want you to solve the problem for me, but at least they're taking the first step to say, oh, I have this issue. I am interested in what you have to say in helping to fix the issue. And so in my case, I'm using a Google business profile cheat sheet to basically help them with that. And so that would be for the more like local business side of my business. So I've got two main clients are local businesses and then course creators, et cetera. And so that would have been for that side. And so that's what I would have done on either side. I would have paid attention to my leads that came in from Facebook and really started emailing them, calling them and doing that. And then on the other hand, it would have been Facebook groups. Now I'm not against cold activities, cold email, cold calling and things like that. But if you're like me, I hate those things. I hate being on the receiving end of those things. And I hate being on the quote unquote giving end of those things. And so frankly, obviously if it's make a cold email or my business doesn't survive, then I'm going to make a cold call or send a cold email so that my business will survive. But to me, those are the last option. So I was trying to do anything other than that. And again, fortunately, like I said, I had the mechanisms in place, but thank God it worked out the way that it did. And we had a good influx come in. And look, I mean, we're not done yet, right? I still haven't made up for the actual MRR loss, right? That came in. So we're still working on and developing these things, but I had to get these initial projects, out the window. Or out the door, I should say.
Was a big reason also for you taking more of a, like stepping back into the role of lead designer, developer, et cetera. Was that to get projects out faster so you could close the books on them faster, like finish projects and get more revenue in? Or would the subscription model, would that have not mattered as much?
Well, it was a second order type of thing. So yes, but that wasn't my first motivation, right? It would be unfair to say that I was thinking that far ahead. My first thought was, I got to save money. I can do a lot of this work and that's it. Right. And, you always hate to take money away from your people, but these are contractors. They have other people they work for too. I'm not the only egg in their basket.
And look, the worst thing would be for you to go out of business. So yeah, it's better that they have reduced hours and you stay afloat.
If I'm out of business, then we're all tanked, right? So that doesn't really make sense, right? Yeah. So you got to, again, put first things first. Your family, your business, unfortunately, has to be first so that everybody else can come along with you. Okay. So, but here's what I noticed, and all due respect to my team, some of whom are probably going to listen to this podcast, right? My team does fantastic work, and I love them. But after I started digging into things, it started to become clear that there were some inefficiencies that had crept in to our processes, right? And some areas where it's like, well, we're probably it probably takes an hour to like write this thing up in Basecamp, whereas like, do we really need to write all this up? Why didn't we just like do it and then say done, right? As the comment in Basecamp. Now, a lot of times I like a lot of writing, but sometimes it's not necessary. And so there were just these little inefficiencies in the process that I'm like, okay, well, what we're going to do here is use this as an opportunity. We're going to tighten things up a little bit. We're going to try to streamline the process. And I haven't made a ton of progress with that. I'm just saying that I'm trying to look into the processes and the things that we're doing. Can I adjust my timelines? Hey, I'm noticing that even on best effort, we're taking sometimes, 3 weeks to 5 weeks longer than we should. And so I started asking some people around, well, what kind of timelines are you guaranteeing on custom projects? Well, we had been guaranteeing, not guaranteeing, but we had been estimating 6 to 8 weeks for projects, even, bigger projects. And I'm finding other people, even on their smaller projects, are saying 9 to 12 weeks these days. And I'm like, okay, well, so I'm off on when I first set this system up. So need to go back and readjust it. So little inefficiencies, just incorrect expectations, frankly, on my standpoint, on some of the items that I was able to uncover and fix. So
it's a great little point.
Opportunity to do that.
I think it's worthwhile, even if, you're not in that situation, just to dip back into some of those processes every once in a while, to look at what could be trimmed. I did that last year. When I brought Jen on as my new VA, it gave me a chance to go back in and I'm like, oh, we don't need to do that anymore. Or crap, I need to put that on this SOP that we have and make a new one. Like, it was actually really good. But when Cam, my previous VA, left, it forced me to revamp the processes, and we're like, 10x more efficient now with those. Sorry, Cam, if you're listening. I feel like she would have loved what we did when she had to step away. But I think it is a good reminder. Sometimes you got to get your work boots on and go back into those processes as the owner. Most of us who are scaling in any way are going to have a couple contractors or a few. So yeah, good reminder to like go in and make sure to clean up those inefficiencies. And quite frankly, it doesn't mean that you need to reduce team costs all the time. It just means that maybe you open up more opportunity for your team. Because, if it's not their business, I think some rock stars are going to be like, hey, Steve, we could improve on this. But most contractors are going to do what they're told. And then that's kind of their job. So it is up to us as the owner to make things more efficient. I'm curious. Oh, go ahead, Steve.
I was just agreeing with you.
I'm curious, what was your runway in regards to, like, did you have a few months before cold selling was going to have to be, like obviously you laid out a really good plan of action for like emergency revenue boost. Ooh, that's a good name. Ooh.
Yeah.
I need to make that an emergency. Yeah. Lifeboat revenue, emergency revenue boost. I think that's the one. ERB. There's my new product I'm working on. All right. Emergency revenue boost. Ooh, that could be a good challenge for pro. Anywho, what was your runway there between, like, you had the month there where luckily the work came in. So this is, of course, just hypothetical. You would have done the proven stuff that had worked for you in the past, the Facebook groups, nurturing the leads that you had in the pipeline. And then cold calling would have been the third. What was your runway like? Did you have a few months, or did you have more time that you had some leeway there, or was it less? What was your runway of, you don't have to say numbers, but savings and like cash flow? What was your runway look like?
Sure. Yeah. No, that is good. No, I was, our cash flow wise, I was still, coming in a little bit above what we needed at the, to pay all the bills and everything, assuming that I did all the work. Right. So we were right there at it. And now if we had lost like another huge client, that would have been a problem. But we did have a runway of a few months. I always do the profit first method. And so I have money that goes out to profit savings, and then I have money that goes out to tax savings. I mean, like, I'm talking about worst case scenario, the IRS could wait a few extra months, or like, whatever. Like, that's like the worst case scenario, which I would never recommend. And this is not financial advice. But that was like the worst case. If it's my family eats or the government gets paid, my family eats. Sorry.
I did that. I took a penalty. I paid my taxes later years ago, because it just came at a really bad time. And it was the similar thing where I was like, we have the cash flow, like it's in billing. We're going to have a wave. So, and I think my penalty, I think I did it a month later. Yes. Please, disclaimer, Steve and I are not telling anyone to not pay your taxes, but I did do a penalty and I paid a month later. And I think the penalty was like $12 or something. I was thinking it was going to be thousands. I was like, oh, that's good to know. It's not that bad. Yeah. I don't know if that's the same now, but that was the case then.
Yeah. And I mean, if anything to actually take away from that, please do not calculate your revenue based on the, your owner's pay based on the top line money that comes in minus the, the few subscriptions you have. That is not the way to do it. You've got to set aside money and get used to living on for yourself. Again, I'm with Donald Miller on the sort of recommended baseline below 250K, you're taking home about 50%. You know what? That is one actual practical thing that I did do that I'm totally willing to share. Since my costs were down, I adjusted my profit first percentages to flow automatically more of that top line revenue towards me than into my operating expenses, because I didn't need to do that for the team. So that's a very practical thing that I did. And I use a system that's actually endorsed by Mike Michalowicz and Profit First, called Relay. And it's basically they're essentially a SaaS company that sits on top of an FDIC insured bank that allows you to automatically flow income into your account, and then it breaks it out into checking accounts like Profit First. And it's just a beautiful system. I would talk for an hour on just it if we had the time. But that is one practical thing I did, and I would always suggest is that, like, part of shoring up that foundation is making sure that you've got the money flowing correctly to be able to pay for yourself and your expenses and your taxes and your profits and all of that. However, whatever method you choose to do, you got to be setting that money aside. So all of this takes, everything that we're saying and the money that's there and everything, it all factors in, those numbers and everything. So
that's great. I think we came up with like 5 to 10 new topics for your podcast here in this one, Steve.
For sure.
A lot of really cool, inspiring stuff in this one. I want to bring this one home. I know we got to roll here, both of us here pretty soon, but is there anything left that do you feel like we should cover or somebody should know, or maybe like a motivation, not a motivational type of thing, but is there any other lessons learned that are really important that we haven't covered with this little rebound that you went through?
Yeah. It's a really, really good question. So here's what I think. I think number one, you have to build in some sort of expectation that this kind of thing will happen. Okay. This is not, if you're a business owner, this is not a, something that is just not going to happen to you. You're not immune from this. There are going to be hard days. Some of those hard days are going to come with a financial element. Right. And there's going to be a rainy day. It's kind of like Dave Ramsey says, right? It's going to rain, right? One of the, I don't know how you feel about Dave Ramsey, but, I used to love his stuff, and I read his Total Money Makeover book many years ago. And in that book, he says, myth, if I set aside for, rainy day fund for when it rains, then I'll have a rainy day, and then I'll have to use that money, and it's all, so if I set aside for it, then that means something's going to go wrong. And he's like, fact, you're going to have a rainy day. It's going to go wrong. Set aside for it now, and so again, in Dave's purview. He's talking about money stuff. But so I would say from a financial standpoint, but also just, gosh, frankly, from a mindset standpoint, the mindset is the biggest thing here. I'm convinced that mindset is like 80% of business. Like the rest of it is just details. It's really all about what you believe about yourself, what you believe about your value, and just preparing for when things like this are going to happen. So that's the first thing I'd say. And the second one is honestly just related to that, in this idea of just like lock in and press on, because it's going to be okay. Like there's never been a time in my life where it has not been okay. At least when it comes to stuff like this, if your family's doing well, you got a support system in life, people like Josh or me to coach you and mentor you. You've got colleagues, you've got your family. If you got people who can support you and be there for you, you can just move on. I'll just share a quick story. So, a couple of years ago, we just voted in a new pastor in our church in December. And so this is like his second month on the job here. And, but we were without a pastor for 18 months. And, it was a bad situation, but we were without a pastor for 18 months. And sort of our motto as a church during that time, because we knew we would come out the other side of this, and we just had faith and believed that it was going to be better than ever, but we didn't know what the details were of that. It was a mindset. It was a belief. It was faith. And so during that time, our sort of mantra was just lock in. Like now is not the time to peace out, peace out Girl Scout, my life is a failure. My life is a wreck. It's not going to work. Our church is a wreck. So what we did was we said, you know what, we're going to lock in. We're going to plug in. We're going to keep doing what we've been doing, and it's all going to be okay. And guess what? It was. So I would encourage you to really just have that mindset of like, you know what, today, oh, I have one more thing I have to share. I'm sorry. But so that would be the mindset is, you know what, today sucks. Maybe I need to take the rest of the day off, bury my head in a pillow. By the way, I did that. I took the day after I made that post, I believe, I took the day off and I laid on the couch and I did not do anything. And guess what? By Thursday, I was locked in again. I was focused. I was ready to go. And now this is all theoretical and this is all mindset. And sometimes mindset is hard to talk about. I don't know, Josh, if you're an Ali Abdaal fan or if you've ever heard of him. He's on YouTube. He's got a lot of great business and productivity advice. I'm reading his book right now called Feel Good Productivity. And he shared something in there that it wasn't even in the context of like anxiety and overwhelm and all of this. And I just thought, oh man, this is too good. This is too good. This is like the best framework ever. He calls it the 10-10-10 rule. And so it's a question you can ask yourself. How is this going to feel, or is this going to matter in 10 minutes? And it's like, you know what? Yep. In the next 10 minutes, this is really going to suck. It's going to keep sucking. It's going to keep feeling exactly the same. Well, what about 10 weeks? Well, yeah, I can't imagine that I'm going to feel this way 10 weeks from now. Like something's going to happen. A lot can change in 10 weeks. There's no way, what about 10 months? Oh my goodness. 10 months from now could be just entire. And just in my experience, since I learned this and started applying it, immediately the weight falls off. Not the physical weight. I wish the mental weight, right? The mental load. We just recently switched our kids' school to a new private school from the old private school. And we knew we had to do it, but it was still hard. And I ran through the same exercise because I was really feeling in the gutter about it, even though it was a great decision and we know it was the right decision. I was having a bad day thinking about it and just dwelling on it. I just asked myself, okay, 10 minutes from now, yep, still sucks. 10 weeks from now, oh my gosh, life is way different. 10 months from now, dude, we don't like putting all that behind. Like we're not even going to be, it's not even going to be on our radar. Life's going to be so good. And so cool. That 10-10-10 rule, if you take nothing else away from this podcast, 10-10-10, and that will help you mindset wise, I believe.
I love that. That's a great little framework to think about. It kind of reminds me, just as we put a close to this one, I don't have exactly that, but I think from my personal experience with what we've gone through as a parent with a daughter with special needs, and we've gone through a lot, not only in that situation, but just a lot of other things. What I've learned in business over the past couple of years, I've learned to, in hard times, if I can add any insight on this, is to zoom out and just remember that I'm in a story. And for anyone who is in a dry spell and feels like there's no way out, if you zoom out and remember, like, this is just a part of my story. It sounds super corny and cliche, and it is, but it's freaking true too. You are in a story, and anyone who's read a book or watched a movie ever in your life, it's never a happy-go-lucky thing all the way through. There's always a challenge. There's always bad things that happen. There's always persistence. All that stuff. You're in that chapter right now. So I don't know about you, Steve, but like for me, I remind myself that, yeah, I'm in a story. I'm in a dark chapter right now, or I'm in a tough point. And if I zoom out, this 10-10-10 rule it's a different style of frame, thinking about zooming out, I think, and looking at like, okay, well, in a year, I look back on this, and it's really hard to do this in the moment because you just want to get past it. But if you think about, wow, in a year, I'm going to learn a lot from this situation. I think being a business owner has taught me that in that situation, as hard as it is, zooming out and looking at like, this is a really important part of my story. And thinking about like, it also helps you think about, okay, I'm in this right now, but what's the next chapter going to look like? Is the next chapter going to be worse and I quit? Or is the next chapter going to be the rebound? And this is when things started to actually turn for me. So that's
Josh, I'm so glad you said this, because I didn't put it or think about it nearly as eloquently as you just did, but I did have the same thought because I love storytelling. I mean, I study fiction writers because it helps me with marketing. So I'm a really big fan of studying story and studying fiction. And I did at one point throughout this process have a very similar thought of just like, this is one chapter in a story, and every good story, like there's a saying by fiction writers that conflict is the engine of fiction. And the reason why that's true is because conflict is the engine of life. If you try to read a book that has no conflict in it, you'll put it down immediately. It's so boring. Conflict is what makes life interesting. Stuff like this is what makes life that you can look back on and say, I overcame that. And so I love that. That's great advice, maybe even better advice than the 10-10-10 of just like zooming out, remembering that you're in a story. And at the end of the day, you're going to have a happy ending. And look, what you can do too is you can look back to things in your own life. I have one in my childhood because my dad died at a young age. I was in 5th grade when my dad died. And so I, in a strange way, have the blessing of being able to look back on that circumstance and be like, I remember what it was like 10 weeks after that. It still sucked. I also remember what it was like 10 months and 10 years after that. And it sucks, but, life has a way of healing wounds. And time has a way of doing it as well. And so time, if you just can put yourself in the framework of time of the story and think about the big picture rather than this moment, it'll change everything for you. So I think that was great.
I don't think we can do any better than that to put a cap on this one, Steve, man. Thank you so much this has been a great chat, man. I really, really enjoyed chatting with you through this. As soon as you posted that, I was like, ooh, I want to dive into that. So thank you so much, man, for first off being just a huge asset to Pro. So many people look up to you largely because of your transparency, on top of just your business principles and what you've shared with the subscription models and recurring revenue. I mean, just you as an entrepreneur you're just a shining example of what happens as an entrepreneur, these tricky, challenging times. But I'm really excited to see you coming out of the other end of this. You're not through all the way, but you're at the tail end of it. Seems like this tough chapter. So really cool to dive into this. Yeah, thanks, man, for sharing everything. And who knows what our next chat will be on.
I don't know. We could talk about any number of things. So I'm excited to have had the opportunity and just really appreciate you.
Heck yeah, dude. Hey, I'm excited to see you in real life here in a few months for Web Designer Pro Con. So
let's do it.
Yeah, dude. Thanks, Steve. All right, friends. Well, the show notes for this episode can be found at joshhall.co/372. We did cover quite a few resources. Again, if you want to connect with Steve, if you want to check out his subscription web design course, if you would like to listen to his podcast or connect with some of his coaching, go to steveschramm.co. That will also be linked in the show notes. And again, I just want to publicly thank Steve for coming on and being very open and transparent about this. I just find that a lot of entrepreneurs like to talk about the wins and the goods, but it takes somebody with honest integrity to share about failures or challenges. And Steve went through quite a challenge recently, but has done an incredible job at rebounding. So I can't wait to hear from you. I know Steve would love to hear from you as well. You can leave us a comment at joshhall.co/372. That will have links to his other episodes on the podcast as well. Stay subscribed if you're not already, because we got some awesome ones ahead. And cheers to building your MRR and reducing churn.